Leah Franklin is a Mount Gambier local who makes plant-based desserts and treats for local cafes and restaurants, and she took to her social media business page recently to have a bit of a brain dump. In her post, Leah mused over the way we seek answers to our questions as a society these days, and what she wrote struck me as something that a lot of people could resonate with as we try to battle loneliness in our community. Leah, good morning. Thank you very much for coming into the studio this morning.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
You have spoken about connection on your business's social media page. Ironically, you actually posted this during National Loneliness Week, but why is it something that was troubling you?
Well, I am in the sandwich generation, so I'm so blessed to still have both my parents. My dad's 90, my mum's 85. They still live independently at home, but require some help from me. So, loneliness can be a little bit of a thing for them. And I also have 3 beautiful daughters and 3 grandchildren. And this gap in the face-to-face connection, I guess, started when my youngest daughter had her first child, so my first grandchild. And, with all the apps and access to information online, I did notice a little bit of a gap in probably the quantity of questions that I got asked as opposed to what I asked my mum when I had my first daughter. And that's not to be observation on my part.
You're not saying you're the be-all and end-all of
Absolutely not, because I made a lot of mistakes as a mum. I'm not
Everyone
perfect.
Does.
But I just noticed that little bit of a disconnect, I guess. I did still get asked a lot of questions by my daughters when they had their babies, but probably not to the depth that I would have asked my mum. So I became aware of how questions get asked online or information overload on the apps and things like that, which can be a bit overwhelming as well. Being blessed with all my favourite people still alive, I realised that's, quite rare. I was able to implement that information and use it to improve my relationship with my parents. So ask my dad more questions or ask my mum questions where it would be easier for me to just Google that.
Yeah, on that, do you think that is something we do all too often now? If we have a question, we just reach for our phones instead of asking?
Absolutely. And I see both sides of that coin. I see how most people are time poor now, so maybe don't have time for that hour conversation you might have with a parent if you pick up the phone and ask a question, because, I'm guilty of that too. I like a good chat with my daughters, and they don't always have time for that. But I think we miss something really, really valuable when we don't do that.
What is it that we're missing?
We're missing the stories. We're missing the information that our parents have gained through a lifetime of their own experiences, good and bad. Sometimes they can cut short our pain, I know, life experience will teach us those things anyway, but sometimes they can, cut something a bit shorter because they've done it 3 times before and it hasn't worked and they've found a better way. So they've always got a story, and their history, their whole history is valuable. My dad's 90 years of history, and Dad can tell a story from the 1950s and get every detail spot on every time. And that information, those stories are invaluable, I feel.
Have you seen yourself making this change? Have you started asking your parents questions? Can you give us an example of what perhaps you have turned to your parents to ask instead of, a search engine, the internet?
Well, yesterday, in fact, I was with my dad, and we're out in the shed a lot. I'm a bit of a tomboy, and I like to be in the shed with Dad. And I spotted a cassette player on the shelf, and Dad's his sheds are horrendous. There's so much stuff in there, but he works a lot with wood. So this old cassette player was absolutely covered in sawdust. So I picked it up and unplugged it, and I brushed it all off, and I found a cassette on his shelf, and I plugged it back in and put a cassette in, and the cassette was turning, but there was no sound. And I thought, I could probably Google that and find out what the troubleshooting, points are for that. And I thought, no, go inside. He was sitting inside at the table, so I took the cassette player inside, and I probably almost knew the answer myself, because I could tell something was not working properly in the back. But I just took it over to him and I said, "Oh, Dad, blah, blah, blah." I told him the story, and I went outside and came back, and he'd plugged his headphones into it and worked out that it was the headphone jack that was loose. And so he worked it out and told me what it was. And I just felt, I could see the joy on his face that he was able to fix that, because Dad often talks about he gets a bit emotional because he can't do the things he used to do. And it just gave my dad purpose in that moment that he fixed that for me. And he said, I'll take it home and let me know how you go. And here, take these cassettes as well and you can play these. And just the joy in that moment was well worth staying off the phone and not Googling that.
What do you think this can extend to? I mean, sometimes I've picked up the phone and I've called my mum and I've said, Mum, I really want to cook this thing that you used to cook for us when we were kids, whether it's a shortbread or a soup or fish pie. Can you find that old recipe book and send it through to me? And she'd send it through, and it would be something from a cookbook that her mum had given her, or a recipe that her mum had, and that story would be shared through to me as well.
Yeah, all those things. I mean, there's, how many things can there be? There's the recipe connection is huge, because you can Google a recipe, but it's that extra pinch of something, or something her mum did that made that recipe extra special. We can all Google a recipe. It's not quite the same as, either finding an old recipe book with the little notes, handwritten notes in it, or just that tip that your mum might give you, that makes that recipe, oh, yes, I remember that's exactly how it tastes when we all sat around the table together. So there are all those connections.
Who's to benefit?
Everyone. Everyone will benefit. I just think, from writing that post the other day, I've had so much feedback from that, and I think people are craving their real life back. I don't think it's just me. The majority of people are feeling the same way. I feel a real change, and I think people are tired of the disconnect.
What would you say to those listening to this today? What do you want people to take away from what you've posted?
I guess I know it's difficult. People are time poor and they're busy, but I'd really love people to try slowing down and just try thinking outside of what I think indoctrinated is a strong word, but I think in a way it's that. I think we've all been indoctrinated into this, get the answer now, get it now. You need to know now. So, and I know I've commented to one of my daughters who, we do it together sometimes. You say, what, I wonder about that. Oh, I know, we can just Google it. and I know that's just, we're probably not going to change that to a point. That's just how it's going to be. But the more personal things, I just hope people, can give it a bit more thought and think about the people in their lives that will benefit from being asked a question and making that human connection.
You've mentioned you are lucky enough to be a sandwich generation at the moment. In a sandwich generation, you have everyone around you. Do you think there's something to say as well for the fact that might not always be the case, and take the opportunities now to learn these stories whilst you can?
100%. And as I said, I know how lucky I am. I know not everyone's like that, but I also have to remind myself of that sometimes, because it's very easy to get caught up in the everyone's pulling me from all directions, and I'm not complaining about any of that, but some days can be exhausting, but sometimes I have to slow myself down and say, you know what, look at this. I've got all of this in this one moment, but I also am very aware of how fragile that is. And my dad being 90, my mum being 85, no one's to say what next week's going to bring. So I'm increasingly mindful of the fact that, that's not a forever thing.
Leah, thank you so much. Some very interesting musings to come our way. Thank you for coming into the studio this morning. We hope we inspire people to connect and help end loneliness in our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
Leah Franklin there. We'll continue this conversation next when we take a bigger look at just how serious loneliness is in our community.